Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited you're here. My name is Matt Gagel. I am the Director of Programs at Montgomery History. And I'm seeing myself on the screen. I'm not used to doing that, but give it a try this time. First of all, I want to thank everyone for your support. We are immensely grateful for all the support that everyone has provided. We are able to provide these programs because of that. And without your support, we wouldn't be able to. Excuse me, just a minute here. If you would like to help to donate to our programs and more programs like this, you can visit our website at montgomeryhistory.org and click on the Donate Now button at the top of the screen. Just a few quick things before we get started here. First of all, I do want to invite you to next week's program. Jim Johnston will be giving a presentation on Abraham Lincoln's connection to the George Washington's descendants and family. That should be a great topic, and looking forward to that. That's next Thursday at 2 p.m. Second of all, if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, you can use the Q&A button, and we will address those at the end. We'll get to as many as we can. Yeah, just use the Q&A button. Last of all, I do want to let everyone know that we're doing something a little bit different this week. We're going to do a little bit of a hybrid presentation. We've done one slightly similar in the past, but we've pre-recorded a visual tour of the Stonestreet Museum. It is a pre-recorded video, but we will be doing a live Q&A at the end. So you please stick around if you have questions, because we will do our best to answer those. I think you'll really like this. It's something a little bit more visual than just a PowerPoint presentation. So hopefully you like it. Please give us any feedback. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and welcome Clarence Hickey, who is, I believe, on the call. Clarence, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, I can see you. There you are. Okay. Do you have anything you want? Yes, I can hear you as well. Okay. Do you have any comments before we get started here?
Oh, this is just wonderful, man. I really appreciate all you've done here, and it's so nice to be able to do this with friends far and wide. I sense that maybe there are some of my old friends involved here today. Maybe I shouldn't use the word old, just dear friends. But you'll see that this museum is closed right now during these pandemic times, and we're doing this video to help with that. And you'll see in the video that we're trying to be current and modern and safe in the pandemic times. And so we're going to be open virtually. And I know you'll enjoy this, and we'll have some time at the end to chat some more. Thanks, Matt.
Okay, let me go ahead and get the video started here. If you'll bear with me just a moment, because it's playing off of my computer. So give me 1 second. Try to do everything correct on here. I believe it's this one. Okay, and you should all be seeing a black screen at the moment. Clarence, can you confirm that you see nothing?
Yes, okay. It's a black screen.
Okay,
correct.
All right. Let me go ahead and get this started here. I'm going to stop our videos. And again, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. I also just been informed that I put the wrong date on the presentation for next week. I apologize. That would be next Tuesday, the 11th at 2 p.m. I apologize for that. I missed that while I was updating the presentation. So again, next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. And let's go ahead and get started here.
Good day, my friends, and welcome to the Stonestreet Museum of 19th century medicine. So what is this little place, and why is it, and where is it? Well, Dr. Stonestreet's biographer helps us understand that and wrote it like this. This is the Stonestreet Museum of 19th century medicine, named in memory of its original owner, Dr. Edward Elisha Stonestreet. This small one-room Gothic Revival building has always been a servant of the people, a caregiver to the community. For 51 years, 1852 to 1903, it was Dr. Stonestreet's community medical clinic with ties to the Civil War. After his death, it became the Rockville Library. It also served the local firemen on their fairgrounds, and later was a meeting place for the Boy Scouts. In 1972, more than a century after the Civil War and a lifetime after the death of its owner, it was moved from the fairgrounds and came back home to its original purpose. Once again, it serves the community, now in the form of a memorial to the life and service of Dr. Stonestreet, and as a bridge to understanding a piece of our local heritage. It is a testament to a time when there were no hospitals or pharmacies in the community, when doctors made house calls and were all things to all people. This humble structure and its occupant witnessed and participated in the dawn of modern medicine in America. Both still offer healing more than 100 years after the passing of Dr. Stonestreet. It is a testament to how one life, well lived, can affect many and make a real difference. Dr. Stonestreet's office is a spiritual place and a place with spirit. Let's go inside. And welcome to the Stonestreet Museum of 19th Century Medicine. This little tiny one-room place, and the big long name, named for Dr. Edward Stonestreet, who practiced medicine here in Rockville in Montgomery County in the last half of the 1800s, from 1852 until he died in 1903. It was that burgeoning time in America when science and technology were helping to change the way things were. And a lot of it for the better. A lot of it affected the medicine and science. And this little place will help tell you about that. This is a small museum with a broad message. A broad message about the 19th century, about science and medicine and biology during that time, and how all of that was improving during the time when Edward Stonestreet was practicing medicine here in Rockville. So this is a little room with a broad message about science and technology and medicine, and about a country doctor, Edward Stonestreet, who practiced medicine for almost 52 years. He died during his 52nd year of practice. He said he wanted to be able to discharge his humanitarian service until the day he died, and that's exactly what happened. So this little place and this big story about medicine, and also the story about the country doctor, is not just a local story here about Edward Stonestreet in Rockville, Maryland. It's really an American story. Story of what was happening all across America, as evidenced by a person here and a medical practice which was at the forefront. Edward Stonestreet was well trained in medicine during his time, and he served as a surgeon with the Union Army during the Civil War, which also helped to teach him a lot about trauma and about accidents and all the kinds of things he might have seen during wartime that he would never have seen during his civilian practice. And all that helped him throughout his life to be of service to his community. So that's what's going on in this little place. And maybe we could start over here and show you a bit about the message here. Now, the message in this museum is not designed around the artifacts. All these artifacts, and what do they say? The message in this museum was first the message of 19th century and medicine then, and then how can the artifacts that we have in our medical collection help tell that story and deliver that message. So the artifacts we have here are designed to help tell the story. The story is not designed around the artifacts. So let's start over here. The timeline in this museum shows what happened during the time that Edward Stonestreet was practicing medicine, some of his own adventures, plus other things going on in the country, and in the development in science. But first of all, take a look at the timeline itself, this red line that points up and down to various dates and events. This is really kind of looks a little bit like the tracing of a heartbeat. And I like to think that this is the heartbeat of history for this museum. A little corny, perhaps. But this starts in the middle of the century and works toward the turn of the century. But earlier in the century, this display case helps you understand a bit about what the practice of medicine was like during the early and middle parts of the 1800s. And you'll see in here there are things like leeches, cupping and bleeding, and some medicines that some people call snake oils. They were advertised to cure whatever, cure everything. But if you really look at it, a lot of times what these old bottles had in it was a little bit of alcohol or maybe opium. So you would feel better for a little while, perhaps. But this was the early part of the century, and Edward Stonestreet actually learned these techniques in medical school in the early 1850s. And then as he progressed in his career, and as the practice of medicine changed, these kind of old techniques fell away when the medical community realized they were probably more harmful than helpful. Then coming over toward the middle of the century, the 1860s and 70s here, this display case talks about how things are changing. And one of the ways that things changed in that time period was the American Civil War. The American Civil War helped surgeons and physicians really understand for the first time, many of them, what it was like to be involved in trauma with thousands of cases of wounded and ill people to deal with. And the Civil War really solved a bit of that problem in instituting some things like triage to decide what to do, to institute the concept of the rapid transport of wounded to medical care. A technique and procedure that has come to us today in various ways. And in some of the surgical techniques, amputation was one of the ones that was very prominent. And more people survived that technique than died from it, which is sometimes not what we think about the Civil War. So the middle of the century. Then as we work our way down toward the end of the century, the last couple of decades, in the 1800s, this display case shows many of the new medical techniques and things that were being developed that really supported the physicians and really helped the patients. And among these, of course, is the use of anesthesia and antisepsis, sterilizing instruments, having sterile bandages to use, and being able to work toward the modern concepts of medicine, understanding the idea of bacteriology. Now, one of the items on the wall here talks about an era of scientific advancement. And we talked just very briefly, mentioned some of the advancements in many fields of science, beginning with Lyell and his geology and ending up with Max Planck and quantum theory. And in the middle there's Mr. Darwin and genetics and the kind of things that would have been helpful to Dr. Stonestreet. So this is a very brief look at sweeping changes in the 1800s that affected medicine and science and you and me and our health, and concepts that have come to us today from back then. During this timeline that we've been talking about here, one of the things that happened very late in the century and around the turn of the century was the development of the new technology of x-rays. But for all of the time Dr. Stonestreet was serving his community, he had no x-rays. What he had were skeletons. He had 3 real skeletons that he used to help the people of his community. We have 1 real skeleton and 1 artificial skeleton. Now we have the artificial one because this one, the artificial one, can be touched by people. When we have young people come in school classes and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, they like to see the skeleton, they like to touch. This one they can touch. But this one we do not touch. That's why I put on gloves. Whenever we work with this skeleton, we're sure that we don't want to harm it or the oils on our hands to affect it. So I put on gloves. But mostly we like to use this one with the young people. They can actually talk a little bit about skeletal anatomy and learn about why the arms are as they are, why we can twist, why we can throw a curveball. But the real skeleton, Dr. Stonestreet had 3 of those. He had an adult, like this one, an adolescent, and an infant. Bone structure is different in different ages of people, and so he needed to have all that because he served the entire population, all generations. And he did that such that the skeleton was something that was not a scary Halloween thing. It was a tool. It was an instrument to help the doctor help his patients. And also, he used the skeleton when he had an apprentice to be able to begin to teach the apprentice about skeletal anatomy and diseases of the bones, and train up this apprentice before the apprentice went to medical school. So this was an instrument to help people, and it was an instrument to help teach a young person about some of the beginnings of being a physician. In the museum, we like to treat things properly and respectfully, and we do that with this skeleton. It is real. We treat it respectfully, and we had some help from the Smithsonian Institution a couple of years ago in being sure that we were handling it right, cleaning it properly, displaying it properly, and talking about it respectfully, since it is a real human skeleton. I'm going to work over here a little ways into this back corner of the museum. And this area back here originally was Dr. Stonestreet's chemistry and pharmacy area. When he started medical practice in 1852 in this little building was his central, like his headquarters. He did his chemistry and pharmacy, or making his own medicines, before the pharmacy opened in the 1870s. And this was the place where he kept his books and his ledgers and all the records of his patients in this little room. And he would dispense medicine here. So we have a display case here with some of the medicines and some of the things that the doctor might have used for that purpose, and including his pad to write prescriptions for people. When the pharmacy opened in Rockville in the late 1870s, then the doctor had some help. Dr. Daniel Owens was an MD pharmacist. And when Dr. Owens opened the pharmacy, that relieved the local doctors of having to do some of that chemistry and pharmacy. They could rely on a professional pharmacist for that help. So Dr. Stonestreet did that. And there are some things in here with Dr. Stonestreet's name on them, some of his prescriptions, cough medicine, and some other things. And when you visit the museum, you can look through all these things. You can touch the artificial skeleton. And let's go around this way now. Yes, hello. I'd like to connect with my patient, Mrs. Veers. Can you help me, please? Well, telephone service came into Rockville in Montgomery County in the 1890s. So this was brand new technology. This was high tech in the 1890s. And we know that Dr. Stonestreet had a phone like this in his home. And we know that some of his patients early on had phones. Many probably did not. But for those of his patients who did have phones, he and they could connect. And when Dr. Stonestreet was making house calls or responding to accidents and injuries, someone would knock on the door and summon him. And he would ask, well, tell me what's going on. Tell me what happened. Describe the illness. Describe the accident and the injury so that I can take with me the right instruments and medications. So when I get there, I can be helpful. But sometimes, if the patients had a phone, they could call the doctor and they could talk about that. And then Dr. Stonestreet could decide whether he needed to be there in person. So this, actually, from more than 100 years ago, was a technology that has come home to us today. When we here in the 21st century and during these pandemic times have a televisit or a telehealth with a healthcare provider over the phone or Facebook. Now that's a modern technology that's really helping us right now, and it began in the 1890s with Dr. Stonestreet and some of his patients doing exactly that. So this is really neat. And here's a quiz for you. Why do we say that when we're finished with our phone calls, we're going to hang up now? Mostly we have that handheld thing and we push a button or something. But back in the day, that turned the phone on, and when you hang up, that turns the phone off. So I'd like to move over here a little bit, if I might, and show you what's in this case and the doctor's desk. I'm going to open this, if I can do that. This was the doctor's desk, where he spent much time with his ledgers and his notebooks on his patients and keeping those records. These are a series of medical books, period correct, mostly from the last half of the 1800s. And there are many, many different kinds of disciplines up here, including some of the grand old masters in medicine, Wood and Douglason and Osler. And we have some of those books in our display cases too. This represents a bit of the A, the arts and humanities, in that term we call today STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. The A, making it STEAM, is for all the ways that communications occur and the various forms that communications take that help all of those disciplines to be successful. So this is a bit of the A, and this is what the doctor would have been doing when he wasn't keeping his records and keeping up to date with his patients. He would have been keeping up to date with the practice of medicine. I invite your attention to this final display cabinet. This is the country doctor. This is what Edward Stonestreet was about for almost 52 years. Being the person who responded to accidents and injuries, went out to the farms for accidents and injuries and to help babies be born, to deal with people who were ill. The country doctor spent most of his time away from this little place. Probably 75 to 80% of his interaction with patients was where the patient was, in the home, on the farm, at the accident scene. And so this talks about Edward Stonestreet and getting around on horseback or in his buggy, wearing his boots with his saddlebags and his medical valise, all the kind of things that the doctor might have had with him when he went to make a house call or respond to an accident. Many different kinds of things, and many of these things are later in the century. Here he's using antiseptics and sterile bandages to be helpful, accidents and injuries, and the more modern stethoscopes that they had toward the end of the century, and a couple of these bones here, the cranium and an arm bone. He had a collection of arm bones, leg bones, hands, feet, ribs that he used for an accident scene. Now remember, there was no x-ray for the doctor to use during his lifetime, during his practice. And so he had a collection of bones. If someone knocked on the door, "Come in, doctor, can you come and help?" "Yes, I can, but tell me what happened." Describe the situation. "Well, my son was riding his horse, and he fell, and I think he broke his arm." So the doctor would take with him his arm bones, so that when he got to the accident scene, he'd have reference to be sure he understood what was wrong and to be able to explain what was wrong to the patient and then explain what he was going to do to be helpful. So this was like the traveling x-rays. And these bones you'll see are a little dark and dingy because they've been handled so much. Unlike the skeleton, which is nice and clean and white, the way we all look on the inside with that skeleton. So this is the country doctor traveling. And you know, back then, much of Montgomery County was farmland. 2/3 of Montgomery County was farmland. Farming was at the heart of the economy. And farming was one of the things that kept Dr. Stonestreet very busy, being helpful to all those people who lived and worked on the farms. Oh, and yes, now and then, when Dr. Stonestreet was on the farm, one of the farm hands or the farmer might say, "Well, Doc, while you're here, could you look at my horse? He's got some sores, and maybe you could help." And with things like saddle sores and injuries and scrapes and things, the doctor could actually help with the farm animals, but he didn't do that. too much, but when asked, he would try. Now, there's a little test that goes along with this. And when you look in here, you'll see that a lot of these instruments are numbered. And if you come over to this doctor's bag, this explains a bit about what the doctor might take with him for whatever the situation was. A baby being born, someone was shot, someone was injured, had a broken arm, someone swallowed some poison. What would the doctor do? You can look at this, and it'll point you over here to see some of the instruments and medications that the doctor might have used to be helpful to people then. So this is the country doctor. This is what was going on across the country. This local story is a national American story, and it's a great one for you and me in understanding the roots of the medicine that we have today that's so helpful to us and how it began with people like Edward Stonestreet, who were working very hard to do the best he could for his community. Now I want to walk over this way. When you enter this little museum, some of the items that attract your attention immediately are the skeletons and this examining table. This is a period-correct examining table that is in spiffy condition, and the doctor would have used this just like the doctors do today when you make an office visit and you sit down on the examining table. If needed, it can be adjusted so it would be comfortable for you. And this originally would have had a pad on it to make it soft and to make it comfortable to sit on. And then if needed, depending on the situation and the medical exam required, the doctor can make sure that that's available and comfortable so he can be helpful to his patients. So this is really a nice addition to this museum. And you can walk around and look at this. It has lots of storage underneath, stored all around. And when you go to the doctor's office the next time and sit on the examining table, look at it and see how it's constructed and where the storage units are. And you'll say, oh, I saw one of those in a little museum from 100 years ago. Same device, same purpose. Well, I thank you for visiting today. And when it's appropriate for you to make a real in-person visit, I know you're going to love this little place. This is a little place that has a lot of spirit to it and a lot of history in this little tiny one-room office dedicated to the memory of a local person who served his community in a way that was burgeoning across America. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So thank you all for sticking with us. I'm going to go ahead and get Clarence to start his video and unmute his microphone there. Let's see if we can get that working. Ah, there you are. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. We will try and get to as many as we can. I see a lot of them popping in here, which is great. And if you're watching this on Facebook, you can certainly type a question in on there, and we'll do our best to get to those. Those of you who have raised your hand, the best way again is to use if you have a question, please use the chat function. Thank you. That's great. Okay. All right. Let's start at the beginning. So how would the medical community handle a pandemic in the 19th century like the current one we have now?
Well, there is a question for the times. And actually, there's been a lot of news reporting looking back at the pandemic in 1918, the flu. I think it was Spanish flu, and what was going on then, and some of the ways that it was handled. And actually, some of the advice from the medical community to the public during that time sounds very familiar. they talked about cleanliness, washing hands, wearing a face covering, not gathering in large groups, staying in to avoid spreading the germ. And so it's a little history coming back, I guess, in some ways, but that's one of the ways they did it. And of course, today we have the scientific capability to construct, research vaccines and other therapeutics to help with the current situation. And back in 1918, the art of science was not quite there on that yet, and many people did succumb to the pandemic back then. So we're in a better position today, but looking back, the medical community was doing the best it could with what it had while it was doing some research and trying to help the public. Let me do one more thing, just so you don't get confused and so you can recognize me here.
We
and
did.
For those of you who aren't used to my fuzz here, that began on March 13, when the World Health Organization declared the pandemic. It just showed up here.
Yeah, we did. So for those, just as an aside there, we both, I did the videography of that. We both wore masks through that. So
yeah,
we were safe.
We were more masked and we were social distanced.
Yep.
And we used the hand sanitizer, which we will do when the museum can open and people can once again visit. We're going to keep those procedures in place and have people use the hand sanitizer on the way in so they don't bring anything into the museum, and on the way out so that they don't take anything out from the museum.
Yep. Okay. Next question I have here. This one's a little bit of a sensitive one, and perhaps you can address this a little bit, Clarence. But someone says, "Do you have an ID for the skeleton? Do you also have the adolescent and infant skeletons?"
Mm-hmm. I'll say some yeses and nos there. We do not have an ID on the skeleton. We don't know who the skeleton was. The forensic pathologist from the Smithsonian who helped us with that told us that skeleton was or is a male in his mid-20s, and that's all we know. The only information we have about that skeleton. It was provided to the museum when it opened by a local doctor in Rockville named Linthicum, Dr. William Linthicum, who was the grandson of Edward Stonestreet. There were doctors all through the generations between Stonestreet and his great-grandchildren. And Dr. Linthicum helped create the museum and bought that skeleton to help us. Now, the original 3 skeletons that the doctor had, the adult, the adolescent, and the infant, are long gone. I'm not sure exactly what happened to those. The history doesn't tell us much about that. But after the doctor died, when his medical practice was being closed down and passed on, I think a lot of his instruments and things just moved on. So we really don't know.
Okay. Next question I have here. I got a couple questions related to baby delivery. So first one is, did the doctor ever have to deliver babies in the office? And then someone says, if a baby were in breech position, were cesarean procedures available, and would Dr. Stonestreet have performed them?
I would say those cesarean procedures were available. They were very dangerous back then. If a baby was in breech position, there may have been some other things they could do to help it be born. We know that Dr. Stonestreet helped deliver hundreds and hundreds of babies. Most of them, in fact, I don't know of any that were born in his office. Babies were born at home or wherever the event was occurring. And so he was out and about. And some of the records we have some diaries from some of his patients. And there was one family who had 8 children who lived about 3 miles east of Rockville. And they were Quakers, and they kept detailed diaries about everything. I literally spent the summer of 2008 reading 56 years of diaries. And in those diaries, they talk about babies being born. And in the husband's part of the diaries, he would say, well, Caroline says it's time to send for the doctor. So he'd get a farmhand and tell him, and they'd ride into town, get the doctor, and ride back out. As far as I know, the 7 children whom he helped deliver for that family, he was always on time. He was never late. He was close a few times, but he was always there in time to be helpful. And so when I'm in the museum and people want to see about this, because we have a labor and delivery kit in the country doctor's display case, and they'll ask about the doctor delivering babies, and I'll say, well, let's be clear and honest here. Women and mothers deliver babies. Physicians merely assist. How many did he assist? We don't know exactly. Hundreds and hundreds, I'm sure.
Okay. The next question I have here. So it says, in the video, the historic interpreter spoke briefly about snake oils and other medications that Dr. Stonestreet used.
Yeah.
My question, is there any historic evidence that he also employed an herbal medicine? I'm asking because of the gardens that are on the property. Is there any connection?
Well, at the Stonestreet Museum, the little museum sits on about a 2-acre city of Rockville park. It's called the Belle Dawson Historic Park. And there's a big old mansion house there and the doctor's office. And we do have a medicinal and herbal garden behind the big house as a historic way of talking about life in the 1800s. And there are some plants there that would be medicinal. And I do know that Dr. Stonestreet had about a 30-acre garden, not on his property, but out another part of town where he grew lots of things. Some of it was food for the family. Some was food for the livestock. He had chickens and a horse, and some may have been medicinal. Now, earlier in his practice, he might have used some of those herbal medications to be helpful. Some of them had some value. Some of them probably didn't. But as he worked through his career, in his 50 years of his career leading up to the turn of the century, a lot of the herbals probably were replaced by real medications that the doctor could procure from the supply houses in the Northeast, in Philly, Boston, New York, the supply houses for medications.
Okay. Did Dr. Stonestreet treat the enslaved people of the area?
Yes, he did. In fact, our history tells us that Dr. Stonestreet would help anyone who called upon him, regardless of who they were or whether they could pay. And we do know that he treated the African-American community before, during, and after the Civil War. He was a man of conscience. He was a man of faith. He was very, very involved in his Methodist church. And I think these things helped to fuel who he was and how he treated those under his care. We do know that he gave a lot to the community, asking for very little in return. He offered his services to the sheriff's department if prisoners needed help. He offered his services to the local almshouse in Rockville, where a poor indigent person could get a meal, get a place to sleep, clean up, and get medical care. If someone there needed medical care, the almshouse would send for the doctor, and he would go and be helpful.
Okay. Did Dr. Stonestreet ever have female nurses or assistants?
As far as I know, he never had a nurse. He was practicing by himself, which was not uncommon back then. As far as assistants go, he would have had assistants when he had an apprentice. In the middle and toward the end of the century, the way someone became a physician, a surgeon, or a pharmacist holding an MD, was to begin the training as an apprentice. You found a local doctor whom you trusted and who could help train you up for a couple of years, 2 to 5 years or so. And you would live with the doctor, go on house calls, go on accident calls, whatever, and be tutored. And then when the doctor thought you were ready, he would help you matriculate in medical school. And that's what happened with Edward Stonestreet. So during those times when he had apprentice, I think there may have been 3 times in his career where he had an apprentice for a couple of years. So that apprentice would essentially be an assistant. And we know also for a while later in the century, one of his daughters often rode with him out to an accident scene or to a home where there was an illness or a baby being born. He had that help. And then I think it was in 1894, his youngest daughter married, the last of his 6 daughters to marry. He was a lucky man with 6 daughters. The person she married was a new young MD named Otis Linthicum. And we know the last decade or so, perhaps, of Dr. Stonestreet's life, he and his young son-in-law often rode and served together. So he had different kind of assistants over time, but as far as I know, no nurse, no receptionist in there, no fish tank to help you be calm while you're waiting. It was just him.
Okay. The next question I have here is, did the doctor live next door to the office? What is the address of the museum, and is it the original location?
Mm-hmm. Okay, beginning, yes. Originally, Dr. Stonestreet's home was in downtown central Rockville, very near the courthouse, which has historically been about the center point in the city of Rockville, the old courthouse. And his little medical office was on the corner of Monroe Street and Montgomery Avenue in Rockville, right on the corner in downtown Rockville. And his home was kind of set in the background. He had about, I think, about 2 acres of land there. So yes, his little medical office was there. He also had in his home the ground. He had a 3-story federal style brick home, quite a nice home back then. And the ground floor in that home was his what doctors called their surgeries. That's where his office really was. If patients needed to come and see him, they would come to the surgery area in his home. The little medical office, with time, was not seeing so many patients, but was where his records were, where his medications were. If someone came into town for medication, he would dispense that medication from his little office. But most of the work he did there was in his home. But as I said in the video, 75 to 80%, I've estimated, of his interaction with patients was where the patient was, making a house call or responding to an accident. The doctor came to the patient back then.
Okay. Any idea if the doctor had an understanding of germ theory?
Yes. When he first started practice and was training in the 1850s, probably not. It wasn't until the latter 1860s and into the early 1870s when that science of germ theory, bacteriology, and aseptic sterile surgery was coming to the forefront. Joseph Lister, the European surgeon who pioneered aseptic surgery, doing surgery without infection, his seminal paper on that was published in 1867, 2 years after the Civil War. And the antiseptic that he used in that was a weak solution, a 2 to 5% solution of carbolic acid. And when Lister was experimenting with this with his surgical patients, he used it to swab down everything, and he sprayed it into the air to kill germs. And that procedure reduced the infection rate in his surgical suite significantly. And I know from those diaries I mentioned to you, from the farming family outside of Rockville, they noted in one of the house calls that Dr. Stonestreet made to help his wife, Mrs. Farquhar, Caroline, her husband, Roger, noted in there that Dr. Stonestreet used the carbolic acid. And that was in 1884. So we know that he was keeping up with the latest developments in medicine as best he could with the journal. We know he subscribed to medical journals, and he was one of the physicians who helped to found the Montgomery County Medical Society in the latter 1800s, so that the doctors could communicate and hold meetings and seminars and help each other. So we know he was doing that, and then to the best he could. Great question.
Okay, and for those who ask, the museum is actually located on the Montgomery History campus, which is at 111 West Montgomery Avenue in Rockville, Maryland. It's not currently open, as we are still under closure orders from the governor. But when we begin to reopen, you're certainly welcome to come visit. You can come visit the grounds of the museum. We do have a the garden out there, the Stonestreet Garden, which is a gorgeous location, and we have some incredible volunteers, master gardeners, who take care of that. It is, every time I go in, I do go into the office occasionally. Every time I go in, I always stop in and check out that beautiful garden. It's a great little place. Can you,
Matt?
Yes.
No, let me say one more thing about that.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of that question. where the office, where the medical office sits today is not the original location. It was originally a couple of blocks away near the old courthouse. After World War II, the little building got moved to the fairgrounds, the Montgomery County Fairgrounds, just outside of Rockville, where it was stayed for many years. And then in 1972, it was moved again with the help of Dr. Linthicum, the grandson, and it came to the historic park where it sits today. So it's moved around a bit, and it's been preserved, and we do the best we can to nurture it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I did have a question come through about a recording of this. We will have this video available on our website. Our goal is to get it posted, probably by tomorrow. I know there's been a lot of requests for it, but we will have that available. And then next question I have here is, the link for that is montgomeryhistory.org/mhconnected/watch. And I'll share a screenshot of that in just a moment at the end. Clarence, can you give a little bit of an overview of Dr. Stonestreet's Civil War service?
Yes, thanks, Matt. He actually had 3 functions during the Civil War. The first came in the summer of 1862, when President Lincoln issued a very unpopular draft of young men into the Army. You know, when the Civil War began, the federal government thought this little rebellion would just last a few months and be done, which of course we know it did not. And so there was a draft in 1862. The draft went from the federal government to the states, and the states passed it to the counties to provide the troops under the draft. And in the summer and fall of 1862, Edward Stonestreet and another doctor served as the examining surgeons for Montgomery County, doing the physical exams on the draftees and the volunteers, to see if these people were fit for the life of a soldier. So Dr. Stonestreet was using the Army guidance and the Army requirements for what that took to do that. And I estimated that, looking at the records, that he, during the period, probably August and part of September, a little bit into October, I estimated that Dr. Stonestreet examined about 800 men. And between him and the other physician, I roughly estimated that they probably examined about 25% of the men, the eligible men in Montgomery County. That was the significance of the draft then. It was serious. And Dr. Stonestreet did a serious job of examining the young men against the Army's requirements. And he exempted or rejected about 230 men for various and sundry medical reasons. So he was doing a thorough and an honest job. So that was the first thing. But what really got Stonestreet involved in the Army was September 17, 1862, the Battle of Antietam. Single-day battle, the bloodiest single day in American history. The war, history of war, if we have to talk about such things. And the armies, both armies, the Confederate and the Union, were overwhelmed with the amount of wounded, and they weren't really prepared for it. And the Battle of Antietam, excuse me here, I'm going to turn that off. The Battle of Antietam was the first real test for some new procedures that the Union Army was instilling on treating mass casualties. But they needed help. And Dr. Stonestreet had an old friend who was a schoolmate from Gaithersburg, Maryland, who was an Army surgeon and was in charge of several Army hospitals in Georgetown, and was attached to the Army Surgeon General's office in DC. The Surgeon General was trying to find physicians who were qualified and could help the Army. And this man, Dr. Clements, went to the Surgeon General and says, I know a guy in Rockville who's qualified, and he's already been working against our Army requirements doing the physical exams. So, and this was the 24th of September of 62, 1 week after the battle, when the wounded had taken over the nearby city of Frederick, Maryland, with all the local buildings and churches turning into temporary hospitals. So Edward Stonestreet went down to the Surgeon General's office. He had with him a note prepared by his friend as an introduction, and he went to the Surgeon General's office and he was there for some time, interviewed with several different physicians and doctors there, and right on the spot that day signed a contract. He and Surgeon General William Hammond signed a contract that Dr. Stonestreet would begin serving with the Army. And they sent him back to Rockville, of all things. The Army took over the courthouse and the grounds around it in Rockville, the county courthouse, and turned it into a temporary general hospital. What was happening was that after the Battle of Antietam, and all the soldiers who had their physical exams, their medical exams and surgeries in Frederick needed long-term care. And the US Army was creating new, large, state-of-the-art hospitals in the major cities, DC, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and some others. And they were transferring these wounded from the field hospital out by the battlefield to these long-term care hospitals. And we know that about 900 soldiers wounded were transferred south from Frederick, going into the new hospitals in DC, and they stopped in Rockville on the way for any care they may have needed in Dr. Stonestreet's. He was put in charge of a 350-bed temporary Army General Hospital in the courthouse in Rockville. And that little hospital ran for about 4 months, from late September of 1862 to the end of January of 63, when it was closed, and all these new large state-of-the-art hospitals were opening in early 63. So that was the second thing. Examining surgeon for the wounded from Antietam. In the late winter, early spring of 1863, Dr. Stonestreet was called into service again by a group of cavalry who were in and around Rockville. There was a group of 4 regiments of cavalry from Michigan were sent to the DC area to help with the defense of the federal city. Now, a regiment back then was 1,000 to 1,200 soldiers, and their horses and wagons and cannon and all that. So this is more than 5,000 soldiers coming in to help around Washington. And we know that one of the companies of the 6th Michigan Cavalry Regiment, Company M, was in and around Rockville and needed medical care. And the captain of that command heard about Dr. Stonestreet, went and talked to him, and enlisted his help again. And he stayed in that position from late February of 1863 until the end of June of 63. And then his service with the Army was done. So it was about a year that Dr. Stonestreet was called into service and helped in all the ways that he was asked to. He was a good man.
Okay, thank you.
Long
Clarence. Answer. Yeah, long answer, definitely. Yep. That's okay. It was the answer they were looking for. Okay, so we're going to just do one more question, and then I will be showing where you can find the recording of this once we get it posted. The last question we have here is, where did it go? Disappeared. Okay, here it is. Are there things in the museum? Are the things that are in the museum actually? Do they actually belong to Dr. Stonestreet?
Mm-hmm. Most of what's in the museum. No, most of what's in the museum are donated pieces over time of people who have background with physicians from that era, and they've donated things for safekeeping. They couldn't get rid of them, and so we've taken them on. All period correct. But we do have a few things that were the doctor's, a couple of instruments, and when you look in that display case, that's the country doctor case with the cranium and the bones, the arm bones. Those were his. Not the doctor's, but his possession, not his bones. But he had that collection of bones, and those were really his. And those are the ones that he took with him when he went on house calls and traveling. So let me say, if I might, Matt, just one more thing here.
Sure, absolutely.
To close out here, with all that you've seen in this little museum, that took us a while to restore it and create this broad message and make it something really, really cool. I owe a lot of thanks to Montgomery History and the staff who supported all this, and especially to the curator, Elizabeth Lay. When you look at that museum, there's a medical message and all that stuff there, but when you look and see how it's set up, how it's displayed, how the message is delivered, and how easy it is on the eye to see it and to read it and to make it attractive, that's the curator. Elizabeth Lay really just did a fantastic job with that. We owe her a real debt. And I thank everyone who's done that, and thanks to them for keeping me involved.
Well,
Thanks, Matt.
we appreciate all the work that you and Elizabeth Lay have done for that with that museum. It is well worth the visit when we're able to do that. Okay, so before
Matt, may
yes,
I'm
absolutely.
not sure what will happen from here on out, but if some of the folks on this joining us here today would like to contact me personally and talk or answer questions or get resources or something, can they contact you and you can pass
Absolutely.
that to me?
Yes, definitely. They can send it to me. My work email is mgagle, that's MGAGLE, at montgomeryhistory.org, or you can use historyconversations at montgomeryhistory.org. And I will absolutely forward those on to Clarence, and we will get those to him. And again, I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to everything. We're getting close to 3 o'clock and I'd like to wrap things up. But we can certainly reach out to Clarence and he can answer any other questions. All right, before we go, well, go ahead.
I'll say hi. I know there's several of my dear old friends who I communicated with on Facebook the last week or so about this webinar, and it's a real pleasure to have them involved. And I just want to say hi, my friends.
Well, I'm sure they appreciate you doing this, and they're glad to see you. Okay, real quick here, I want to show everyone. Let me get this screen share going. You can see on the screen here that we've got our website, and you can see that we've got, this is montgomeryhistory.org. If you click up on Montgomery History Online, you can do Explore, which will take you to our online exhibits, or you can click on the actual button. That'll bring you to our online hub, which we have our archive, our COVID-19 archive, and some other online resources that you can access. For this particular part for the history conversations, if you click on watch, you can go ahead and in there and you'll see information about upcoming talks, including one that's coming on Tuesday, August 18th, and then also the talk that's next Tuesday. And then previous conversations are actually a little bit below that. And from there, you can certainly, we'll have a recording of that. And I do believe our plan is to put the shorter clip video of the museum itself up under, you go up to museums and then click on Stonestreet Museum of 19th Century Medicine. We will have a recording up there as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Again, Clarence, thank you so much for being here and helping out with that recording. With that, again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me at mgagle@montgomeryhistory.org, and we'll forward those where they need to go. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks again, Clarence.
Okay, stay safe.
Bye.